The forest exhaled ash, a gray veil settling over Eli Carter's shoulders as he stood at its edge. Dusk bled orange through the skeletal trees, their blackened limbs clawing at the sky like unanswered prayers. His radio crackled a faint pulse in the silence, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes, red-rimmed from smoke and sleeplessness, traced the horizon where the wildfire had raged hours before. The air tasted of char, thick and bitter, coating his throat like grief he couldn't swallow. He was alone, or thought he was. A flicker in his peripheral vision, quick as a dying ember, made his breath catch. A shape low and gray moved through the haze. A dog, its fur blending with the ash, paused at the edge of a clearing. Its amber eyes met his, and for a moment the world held its breath. The forest was a graveyard, its trees reduced to charred husks that crumbled under Eli's boots. Ash fell like snow, dusting his jacket, his hair, his soul. The ground, brittle and uneven, groaned with each step, as if protesting his presence. The scent of scorched pine stung his nostrils, mingling with the faint tang of metal remnants of a fire that had devoured everything but memory. He navigated the wreckage, his flashlight cutting weak beams through the smoke that still curled from the earth. It was a place that mirrored him, hollowed out, scarred, barely holding together. A distant howl, soft as a whisper, pierced the silence. Eli froze, his pulse quickening. It wasn't the wind. Something was out there alive in this ruin, watching him from the shadows. Eli's hands clenched around the flashlight knuckles, white against the grime. He leaned against a charred stump, its bark flaking like old skin, and let his eyes drift shut. The memories came unbidden, slithering through the cracks in his armor. Caleb's laugh echoing over the roar of flames 3 years ago, right here in these woods. "We got this, bro," Caleb had said, clapping Eli on the back before the wind shifted, turning the fire into a beast. Eli had run lungs burning, but Caleb hadn't. The guilt was a stone in his chest, heavy and unyielding, pressing until his breaths came shallow. He didn't cry. Tears had dried up long ago, leaving only this numbness, a void where fire had scorched his soul clean. His fingers dug into the ash, smearing it across his palms like penance. Why him? Why had he survived when the flames had claimed everything else? A soft rustle nearby snapped his eyes open, but he saw nothing, just the endless black. Inside, the collapse continued, silent and unrelenting, his stoicism fracturing like the ground beneath him. He whispered into the void, "I'm sorry," the words dissolving in the smoke, unheard by anyone but the ghosts. Eli straightened, wiping ash from his face, but the feeling lingered, a prickling at the nape of his neck like breath on skin. He scanned the haze, the beam of his flashlight dancing erratically. There, through the curling smoke, a pair of amber eyes gleamed steady and unblinking. They belonged to a shape low-slung and gray, a German shepherd that seemed woven from the ash itself. It didn't move, didn't growl, just watched with an intensity that pierced the fog. Eli's heart stuttered. Was this real or another trick of his fractured mind? The dog tilted its head, and a faint jingle echoed metal on metal, like a collar tag catching the wind. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the eyes vanished, swallowed by the shadows. Eli exhaled, a shiver running through him. Something had shifted in that gaze, a silent promise of change amid the ruin. 3 years ago, the forest had been alive, a green cathedral, where Eli and Caleb Carter moved like shadows among the pines, their axes glinting under the sun. Brothers in blood and fire, they'd shared everything, jokes over crackling radios, dreams of a life beyond the smoke. Caleb, the younger by 2 years, had always been the spark. His laugh, a wildfire that warmed even the coldest, shifts his eyes bright with the invincibility of youth. "We're untouchable, Eli," he'd say, clapping a gloved hand on Eli's shoulder as they charged into the blaze. But the wind turned that day, a treacherous whisper that fed the flames into a roaring inferno. Eli remembered the heat like a living thing clawing at his suit, the air thickening with screams that weren't just the trees. He'd reached for Caleb, their hands brushing in the chaos, but the fire swallowed him whole, leaving Eli to stagger out alone, coughing ash and guilt. The loss carved him hollow, stripping the color from his world. Where once he'd charged forward with purpose, now he lingered on the edges, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. Regret was his constant companion, a shadow that whispered in the quiet moments, Why you? Why not him? Isolation wrapped around him like smoke pushing away friends, family, until the forest became both prison and penance. Eli's days blurred into a ritual of endurance, starting with the grind of his alarm at dawn, pulling him from dreams laced with fire. His cabin perched on the forest's fringe was a sparse shell walls bare, except for Caleb's faded jacket hanging like a specter in the corner untouched and gathering dust. He'd brew coffee black as tar, sipping it while staring out at the mist-shrouded trees, his mind a fog of numbness that dulled the ache. Shifts at the fire station were mechanical suiting up, checking gear, responding to calls with a stoicism that masked the void inside. Mara's therapy sessions loomed like unwelcome storms. He'd sit in her office arms crossed, deflecting her probes with grunts and half-truths, building walls higher with each evasion. Evenings dissolved into solitude, scrolling reports on old fires. The glow of his screen, the only light in the dim room, his breath shallow, as if the air itself weighed him down. The routine was a cage protective and paralyzing, the emptiness of his home echoing the hollow in his chest, where grief had frozen everything solid. In the fragmented reports Eli had unearthed from old fire department archives, Ash emerged not as a mere dog, but as a specter forged in flame. A German shepherd, his coat once a proud black and tan, now faded to the ashen gray of perpetual smoke. He had been part of a search and rescue unit years before Caleb's fire. Trained by a handler who saw him as tool rather than companion, Ash had endured the whip of commands and the sting of neglect, his loyalty twisted into a survival instinct sharper than any fang. The betrayal came in the heart of a blaze, much like the one that scarred Eli's soul, a wildfire that roared through these same woods, devouring teams whole. Ash collar tight around his neck like a noose had broken free from his abusive handler's grasp, ignoring the shouts that branded him disobedient. Instead, he darted through the inferno, his paws blistering on embers, his lungs filling with acrid poison, leading a stranded unit of firefighters to a hidden ravine where cool air still lingered. They called it a miracle, the way his silhouette cut through the orange haze, his barks piercing the roar like desperate pleas. But when the flames subsided, Ash vanished. His body a map of Burns' pink scars snaking across his flanks, fur patchy where fire had licked too close. The handler, furious at the loss of his property, abandoned the search, leaving Ash to the wilds, a ghost betrayed by the very humans he saved. In Eli's dreams, which grew more vivid with each sleepless night, Ash appeared not as hero, but as survivor. Eyes wary, body low, his movements a silent testament to mistrust. He paced the dream forest shadows, clinging to his form like regrets, his breath shallow echoes of the smoke he could never escape. The dog's pain was visceral, a mirror to Eli's own, both marked by fire's cruel touch, both haunted by the betrayal of those meant to protect. Ash's survival was raw, instinctual, a quiet defiance against the void, his amber gaze holding secrets of loss that words could never touch. Reports hinted at sightings over the years, a gray shadow in burned clearings. Collar long, lost perhaps torn in the chaos. He fed on scraps drank from ash-choked streams, his body lean and scarred, every muscle tensed for the next threat. Yet in those dreams, Eli saw the vulnerability beneath the way Ash's tail would twitch at a kind voice, only to still in fear. It was as if the dog carried the weight of unsaved lives, much like Eli bore Caleb's ghost. Their sufferings intertwined in the silent language of the wounded. Eli's nights dissolved into visions where Ash watched from the forest's charred fringe, his gray form blending with the mist like a half-forgotten memory. In these dreams the dog didn't approach, didn't bark, just observed with those amber eyes reflecting the same hollow ache Eli felt in his bones. Both were relics of fire's wrath. Eli's hands, calloused and trembling, mirrored Ash's scarred paws, each step cautious, as if the ground might crack open again. Mara in their sessions leaned forward, her voice a gentle probe into the silence. "This dog in your dreams, it's you, Eli, a projection of the guilt you carry for Caleb." But Eli knew better. The parallels were too stark, too real. Ash's wary stance, ears pinned back against invisible threats, echoed Eli's crossed arms, his deflection of her questions. They were both emptied by loss, Ash of his trust in handlers, Eli of his brother, and in that shared void a tentative bridge formed. Nonverbal cues wove their stories in dreams. Ash would flinch at a raised hand, just as Eli tensed at the crackle of a radio. Their recovery arcs intertwined subtly. Eli would wake gasping, reaching for water, and imagine Ash lapping from a stream, both quenching a thirst deeper than physical. Mara noticed the fixation, her notes scribbling furiously as Eli described the dog's silent vigil. "It's like he's waiting for me to see him," Eli muttered, once his voice cracking. The mutual recognition stirred something fragile, pain acknowledged without words, a quiet promise that healing might come not in isolation, but in the mirroring of wounds. As days blurred, Eli found himself scanning the tree line during shifts, half expecting those eyes, the emptiness between them a canvas for what could be rebuilt. Snow dusted the blackened forest like a fragile veil, crunching under Eli's boots as he trudged alongside Mara, their breaths clouding the crisp air. The trees loomed as silent sentinels, their charred branches etched against the gray sky, the scent of old smoke still clinging to everything like a persistent ghost. Mara glanced at him, her eyes sharp with concern. "This place, it's where it happened, isn't it? Caleb's fire." Eli nodded curtly, his jaw tight, but before he could respond, a shape materialized from the haze, a German shepherd fur the color of swirling ash, standing motionless in a clearing. Its amber eyes locked onto Eli's with an intensity that stole his breath, scars rippling along its flanks like frozen rivers of pain. The dog's presence was ethereal, almost unreal, yet the snow parted around its paws, grounding it in the moment. Eli's heart pounded, a visceral shock rippling through him. This was no dream, no trick of light. Mara's hand gripped his arm, her voice a whisper. "Eli, is that—" The urgency built in the silence, the cold wind howling like a warning as the dog's gaze held a plea that transcended words, heightening the emotional tension to a breaking point. Eli froze, his boots rooted in the snow, the dog's unwavering stare pulling at something deep within him, a thread of compassion tangled with fear. This can't be real. His mind argued logic, a cold blade slicing through the haze. PTSD, exhaustion, the forest playing tricks like it had with Caleb's, screams echoing in his ears long after they faded. Why chase a phantom risk, cracking open the wounds he'd barely sealed? Mara shifted beside him, her voice tentative. "It looks hurt, Eli, but if it's feral—" Yet empathy whispered louder, the dog's scarred form a mirror to his own brokenness, its eyes not accusatory, but resigned like a soul waiting to be seen. He took a half step forward, then halted, internal conflict, raging fear of caring, of losing again, clashing with the pull of those amber depths. Then a soft whine escaped the dog, faint as a dying ember, and something in Eli shifted the balance, tipping toward the heart over the head. Eli's hesitation shattered like ice underfoot, his body lunging forward before his mind could catch up. Boots kicking up snow and ash in a frantic spray. The forest blurred into a monochrome whirl, blackened trunks whipping past the cold air, slicing his lungs like shards of glass. "Hey, wait." His voice rasped, hoarse from disuse, and smoke echoing off the silent trees, as if mocking his impulsiveness. Ash darted ahead, a gray streak weaving through the underbrush, his scarred form flickering like a flame in wind, but not fleeing outright. Eli stumbled over a hidden root pane, jolting up his leg, his hands scraping against charred bark that crumbled like regrets. Instinct drove him, not logic, this chase, a messy unraveling of the walls he'd built each step, pulling him deeper into the unknown. Ash paused at a frozen stream, glancing back with those amber eyes, not in fear, but curiosity, a cautious trust glinting in their depths. Eli slowed, chest heaving, realizing there was no turning back. This pursuit was a vow, silent and binding, to something beyond his solitary grief. Eli dropped to one knee by the stream's edge, the snow soaking through his pants like a cold, awakening, his breath visible in ragged puffs. Ash stood mere feet away, muscles coiled, scars etched in the pale light like veins of forgotten fire. Slowly, Eli unwound his scarf, wool scarred by embers from past blazes, and extended it palm up, an offering raw and uncalculated. "It's okay," he murmured, voice trembling, the words tasting of vulnerability he hadn't allowed in years. Ash flinched at first, ears flattening, a low rumble in his throat like distant thunder, but he didn't bolt. Instead, his nose twitched, inhaling the scent of human sweat and smoke. Mara emerged from the trees, her footsteps soft, watching with wide eyes as the moment hung suspended, the forest holding its breath. Then tentatively, Ash stepped forward, his paw crunching snow, and nosed the scarf, a fragile acceptance that sent a shiver through Eli, not from cold, but from the crack in his guarded heart. The dog's eyes met his, a silent pact forming in that gaze, care-given space, respected wounds acknowledged. It was imperfect, the scarf slipped Ash's body, still tense but real. A promise whispered in the wind that healing might begin here in this scorched sanctuary. Mara placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, her touch grounding as the bond took root, tender and unyielding. Back at the cabin, the snow outside fell in silent sheets, blanketing the world in white, while inside tension hung like frost on glass. Ash lingered at the threshold, his gray fur dusted with flakes, amber eyes flicking between Eli and the open door, as if weighing escape against shelter. He didn't enter fully, instead curling into a tight ball just beyond the warmth of the hearth, a low growl rumbling when Eli moved too quickly to stoke the fire. Eli respected the boundary, his own body language mirroring the dog's shoulders, hunched movements deliberate and slow, as if any sudden gesture might shatter the fragile truce. Mara busied herself with tea, her glances cautious, sensing the mutual wariness that filled the room like unspoken accusations. Ash's ears twitched at every creak of the floorboards, his scarred flanks rising and falling in shallow breaths, a sentinel guarding against betrayal. Eli left a bowl of scraps near the door, not pushing closer, his internal monologue a whirlwind of doubt. He's like me, walls up, trust earned in inches. The silence stretched heavy and unyielding, neither initiating contact, their guarded looks exchanging volumes in the dim light. Hours passed with Ash watching from his spot, unblinking, as Eli sat motionless, the space between them, a chasm of shared caution, slowly narrowing under the weight of patience. The cabin's air grew thick with the scent of stew simmering on the stove, a simple meal Eli prepared with mechanical precision, his thoughts drifting to wounds unseen. Ash remained in the shadows, his amber gaze fixed on Eli's hands as they stirred the pot, the dog's scarred paw twitching involuntarily, echoing a pain long buried. Eli ladled a portion into a bowl, setting it down midway between them, an offering wrapped in silence, no words, just the steam rising like a bridge across the divide. Inside, Eli's mind churned. We both carry fire's mark, his on skin, mine deeper. Ash approached warily, nose quivering, his body low as if expecting a trap, but he paused to sniff, eyes meeting Eli's in a moment of raw recognition. Mara observed from the corner, her notebook forgotten as the dog lapped tentatively, his guarded posture softening fractionally. When Eli unwrapped a bandage from his own blistered hand, a remnant of the recent chase, Ash's ears perked, his limp more pronounced, as he shifted closer, revealing a matching scar on his flank. Their unspoken wounds aligned, a silent communion of suffering, the shared meal a tentative thread pulling them from isolation. The connection deepened without fanfare, mirrored in their hesitant breaths, the cabin's warmth seeping into the cracks of their defenses. A faint jingle cut through the cabin's quiet, Ash shifting in his corner and causing an imaginary echo, perhaps from a caller long lost, that yanked Eli into the past like a hook through flesh. He froze mid-motion, hand hovering over a cup of cooling tea, his mind flooding with the roar of flames, and Caleb's voice calling through the smoke, "Eli, over here." The memory twisted, blending with reports Mara had shared of Ash's heroism, the dog leading firefighters to safety, amid a blaze eerily similar, his collar tag clinking against his chest like a desperate signal. Back in the present, Ash nosed at a loose floorboard, his scarred muzzle gentle, and the gesture triggered another flash. Caleb tossing a ball in their childhood yard, laughter bright as sunlight, now Ash in Eli's throat. Eli's breath hitched, eyes misting, but he extended a trembling hand with a piece of bread, voice soft. "Here, boy." Ash paused, amber eyes locking on Eli's. No recoil this time, just a hesitant acceptance as he took the offering delicately. The moment wove their histories tighter, emotional threads, pulling without utterance, the dog's steady gaze, acknowledging the shared ghosts in a way words never could. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting dancing shadows that softened the cabin's edges, turning the sparse room into a cocoon of tentative warmth. Eli hummed an old tune Caleb had loved, a melody of rivers and open skies, his voice low and ragged notes hanging in the air like fragile hopes. Ash, still in his shadowed spot, lifted his head, ears perking as if the sound tugged at buried memories, his tail giving a single hesitant wag. Mara smiled faintly from her chair, setting down her notes, the atmosphere shifting from guarded tension to something gentler, the snow outside muffling the world into peace. Eli tossed a small stick toward Ash, not expecting much, but the dog batted it lightly with a paw, a playful glint in his amber eyes that sparked a chuckle from Eli, the first real laughter in months, warm as the flames. Ash inched closer, accepting a strip of jerky from Eli's hand, without hesitation, his body relaxing fur, brushing Eli's leg like a whisper of trust. The space between them warmed joy, flickering like embers, the cabin no longer a refuge of solitude, but a shared sanctuary where safety bloomed in small, radiant bursts. Moonlight filtered through the cabin's frost-laced windows, casting a silver glow over the room, where silence had become a companion rather than a barrier. Eli sat by the fire knees, drawn up staring into the flames that danced like memories he couldn't quite grasp. His guard lowered in the quiet hours. Ash, who had lingered in the shadows for days, stirred from his spot, his paws patting softly across the wooden floor, a sound like whispered secrets. Eli tensed at first, breath-catching, but Ash didn't stop. Instead, the dog approached with deliberate slowness, his amber eyes soft, devoid of the wariness that had defined him. Mara, dozing in the armchair, stirred slightly, but remained silent, sensing the sanctity of the moment. Ash paused inches away, then in a gesture of profound surrender rested his head on Eli's knee, the weight, warm and real scars brushing against Eli's hand like shared confessions. Eli's throat tightened, a sob escaping as tears traced paths down his cheeks, years of bottled grief spilling forth in that simple contact. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking his fingers, tentatively stroking Ash's fur, the touch electric with vulnerability. The dog's body relaxed fully, leaning in, a sigh escaping his muzzle as if releasing his own burdens. It was a turning point etched in stillness, Ash's initiation bridging their worlds, the cabin filled with an unspoken vow of mutual healing. Eli's tears fell onto Ash's coat, mingling with the dog's warmth, and in that raw exchange, trust bloomed fully, a beacon against the encroaching dark. The cabin settled into midnight hush, snow muffling the world outside, but Ash's ears pricked up suddenly, his body going rigid as stone beside Eli's chair. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not aggressive but alert, his amber eyes fixed on the window where shadows danced like unwelcome intruders. Eli stirred from his half-sleep hand, instinctively reaching for Ash's fur, feeling the tension coil through the dog's muscles like a spring wound tight. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. But Ash only stiffened, further hackles rising in a silent warning, his posture a primal sentinel against the unseen. Mara shifted in her bed, eyes opening to the unease, the air thickening with subtle dread, the creak of branches outside, a distant snap that could be wind or footsteps. Nightmares clawed at Eli's mind, fragments of Caleb's fire blending with Ash's unease, the dog's stillness echoing echoes of past trauma. A faint howl pierced the night. Not Ash's, but something wilder pulling at the dog's instincts, his growl deepening as if recognizing a ghost from the flames. The environment shifted from sanctuary to siege, tension building in the quiet Ash's watchful form, foreshadowing a storm brewing in the darkness. The cabin door rattled under a forceful knock, shattering the fragile peace, and Ash erupted into a frenzy of barks, his body positioning protectively in front of Eli, hackles raised like blades. Eli's pulse surged, his mind flashing to the fire's chaos. But as he opened the door, the figure on the threshold, a weathered man with eyes like smoldering coals, triggered a deeper quake. It was Harlan, the disgraced firefighter who'd been Caleb's partner, the one who'd fled the blaze early, blaming Eli ever since for the loss that mirrored his own cowardice. "You think you can hide here, Carter, with some mangy mutt?" Harlan snarled, his voice laced with venom, stepping forward, As Ash's growls turned feral teeth bared in primal fury rooted in recognition, Harlan had been Ash's abusive handler. The scars on the dog's body, a testament to whips and neglect. Eli's chest tightened, panic flooding him like rising flames, his shouts echoing Harlan's accusations. "You left him. You left us all." Flashbacks assaulted him. Caleb's screams, Ash leading the unit through smoke. Harlan's retreating back, and he withdrew a step, hands shaking the room, spinning with unresolved rage. Mara intervened, her voice steady, but edged, pulling Eli back as Ash snapped at the air, the explosion revealing layers of trauma, maternal instincts in Ash's protection, the abuser's return igniting old wounds. The air crackled with emotion, both man and dog flooded a glimpse of violence's echo threatening to consume them anew. Harlan shoved past the doorframe, his boots tracking snow and malice into the cabin. His face twisted in a mask of resentment that made Eli's blood run cold. "That dog's mind ran off after I trained him hard." He spat, lunging toward Ash, who positioned himself squarely between them, a low, guttural snarl vibrating through his scarred frame. Recognition hit like a spark on dry tinder. Harlan's eyes widened at Ash's familiar scars, the dog he'd beaten into submission, now a defiant guardian, while Eli's fists clenched memories of the fire surging Harlan, abandoning the team. Caleb's final cry lost in the roar. "Get out!" Eli growled, voice steady despite the storm inside, but Harlan pressed closer, grabbing a poker from the hearth, the standoff turning physical as he swung wildly. Ash leaped, teeth grazing Harlan's sleeve, forcing him back the room, a whirlwind of shouts and chaos, Mara dialing for help, her face pale. The tension peaked in a primal clash, Eli tackling Harlan to the floor, pinning him as flashbacks intertwined Ash's heroic dash through flames, Harlan's betrayal that cost lives, including the unit Ash had saved. "You ruined us." Eli hissed, breath ragged, the emotional weight crushing as Harlan's defiance cracked tears, mixing with blood from a split lip. The confrontation hung on a knife's edge, tangible threat pulsing through every vein until sirens wailed in the distance, breaking the spell, but leaving scars reopened. The sirens faded into the night, leaving the cabin steeped in a heavy quiet. Harlan hauled away in cuffs, his threats dissolving like smoke. Eli slumped against the wall, breaths ragged his hands, smeared with the scuffle's remnants, blood and dirt mingling like unresolved sins. Ash pressed close, his scarred body trembling slightly, but his head lifted to meet Eli's gaze, amber eyes steady, a silent reaffirmation that pierced the chaos. Mara moved with quiet efficiency, locking the door and fetching water, her touch on Eli's shoulder, a grounding force as she whispered, "It's over for now." The danger's echo lingered in the air, but as Eli's fingers buried into Ash's fur, a promise formed in the contact protection unwavering against the shadows of yesterday. Ash leaned in a soft whine, escaping his warmth, a balm to Eli's frayed nerves, closing the chapter with a vow etched in closeness no words needed, just the mutual shield of their bond anchoring them in the fragile dawn. Dawn broke cold and unforgiving, the snow outside the cabin pristine, but for a set of unfamiliar footprints circling the perimeter, deep and deliberate, like accusations pressed into white. Ash paced restlessly, nose to the ground, his hackles a ridge of unease low, whines punctuating the silence as if scenting ghosts from the fire's grave. Eli peered through the frosted window, his breath fogging the glass instincts screaming of pursuit. Harlan's release on bail, whispered by a radio report, tying knots in his gut. Mara pored over old files, uncovering links Harlan's obsession with Ash, the dog he'd once owned, now a symbol of his failures, fueling a vendetta that extended to Eli. Subtle signs mounted a snapped twig beyond the tree line. Ash's sudden freeze, mid-step ears swiveling toward invisible threats. The forest whispered warnings through rustling branches, animal tracks avoiding certain paths as if sensing peril. Eli's hands gripped his rifle, watchfulness etching lines on his face, the air thick with anticipation, every shadow a potential harbinger of the storm to come. The forest's edge erupted in chaos as Harlan burst from the tree-line, shotgun glinting in the pale light, his face a mask of twisted fury that echoed the wildfire's rage. "You took everything, my dog, my reputation!" he bellowed, voice cracking like dry timber, advancing on the cabin where Eli stood frozen, Ash at his side, growling low. The threat crystallized, unavoidable. Harlan's finger twitching on the trigger, eyes wild with the ghosts of past failures aiming not just at Eli, but at the bond he'd come to shatter. Mara shouted a warning from inside, but the confrontation escalated, Harlan firing a warning shot that splintered wood near Eli's head, the acrid smell of gunpowder mingling with lingering smoke like a fire reborn. Ash's barks turned frantic body coiled for action, as Eli's mind raced flashbacks of Caleb's final moments, blending with the present peril, his own body weakening from adrenaline's toll. The ravine nearby loomed a drop that promised death, Harlan herding them toward it with menacing steps, the imminent loss palpable in every breath, every snarl. Eli's world narrowed to the barrel of the shotgun, heart pounding as Harlan closed in, but in that razor-edge moment, a fierce clarity surged. Protect Ash, protect the fragile healing they'd forged. No more, Eli muttered, voice steel, despite the fear churning inside, lunging forward to grab the weapon's stock, twisting it skyward as a shot boomed harmlessly into the air. Ash exploded into motion, leaping at Harlan's leg with teeth bared, a primal force, knocking the man off balance, his cries mixing with the dog's snarls in a symphony of resolution. Mara emerged, wielding a flare gun that cracked like thunder, illuminating the struggle in stark red light, but it was Eli's decisive shove that sent Harlan stumbling toward the ravine, the man teetering on the edge before Eli pulled back, choosing mercy over vengeance. The tension shattered as Harlan fell to his knees, defeated, the emotional weight lifting like smoke, dispersing Eli's guilt, transforming into purpose, his bond with Ash sealed in that act of mutual salvation. Panting, Eli knelt beside the dog, hand on fur, their eyes meeting in silent gratitude, the climax resolving in a cathartic release. Sunlight pierced the cabin's curtains in thin, hesitant shafts, illuminating the disarray of the night. Before scattered gear, a toppled chair, the faint metallic tang of blood lingering in the air. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, his body a map of bruises, breaths coming slow and deliberate, each one a quiet affirmation of survival. Ash lay at his feet, head on paws, his scarred flank rising and falling in sync, eyes half closed but watchful. Mara moved with gentle precision, dabbing antiseptic on Eli's cuts, her hands steady, the silence broken only by the soft hiss of cloth on skin. No words rushed to fill the void. Instead, the room breathed with them, long pauses, stretching between movements, a reflective hush enveloping the space like fresh snow. Eli's gaze drifted to Ash. A faint nod exchanged the dog's tail, thumping once a minimal gesture heavy with meaning. The crisis's echo faded gradually, replaced by a fragile peace, the world outside stirring faintly, as if granting them this moment to decompress wounds tended not just on flesh, but in the quiet depths of their shared ordeal. Days blurred into a rhythm of recovery, the cabin a sanctuary where small acts wove threads of restoration. Eli rising at dawn to fill Ash's bowl, the dog following him with steady steps, no longer limping but mirroring Eli's cautious gait. Their eyes met often, unguarded now, amber locking with hazel in moments rich with unspoken understanding, the air humming with the scent of pine and healing salve. Mara observed as Ash leaned into Eli's touch during walks for a brushing leg, in a dance of proximity, while Eli's shoulders softened, his smiles, tentative but genuine, emerging like sunlight through clouds. Sensory details anchored their progress, the crunch of snow under synchronized paws and boots, the warmth of shared meals where Ash ate from Eli's hand without hesitation, behaviors intertwining like roots beneath soil. Over time, the bond deepened silently. Emotional recovery reflected in mirrored actions, Ash's playful nudge eliciting Eli's quiet laugh, a steady tempo building resilience. The healing was mutual, a gradual unfurling, each gesture a step toward wholeness in the quiet cadence of their days. Eli knelt at the fire's scarred heart in the forest snow, parting under his fingers, as he unearthed the relic, a collar fused into melted stone tags, warped but legible, bearing Ash's name from a life before betrayal. The metal was cold, unyielding, yet it hummed with history, a symbol of chains broken by flame and time. Ash approached quietly, his breath warm against Eli's hand, and rested his head there, eyes closing in a surrender that spoke volumes, the motion intimate as a heartbeat shared. For the first time, Ash responded to his name, whispered softly, ears twitching, body leaning in without reservation, the gesture a quiet thunder of trust. Eli's fingers traced the collar's edge, releasing a breath held too long, emotion flooding like a dam's gentle crack. Tears not of sorrow, but release the past's shadow, lifting in that touch. The forest watched, silent witness to their rebirth, the collar a bridge from ruin to renewal.